The ivory invitation had arrived 3 months ago, elegant script dancing across expensive cardstock. Marcus Thompson and Isabella Sterling request the pleasure of your company. I'd run my fingers over the embossed lettering, tears blurring my vision. My son was getting married, and despite everything that had happened between us, he'd invited me. I should have known it was too good to be true. Standing in the opulent ballroom of the Sterling Country Club, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and tables draped in silk, according to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. I felt like an imposter in my department store dress. I'd saved for months to afford even this modest outfit, working double shifts at the diner where I'd been employed since Marcus's father abandoned us when he was 12. The other guests swept past me in designer gowns and tailored suits, their laughter tinkling like wind chimes in the perfumed air. I clutched my small purse tighter and made my way toward the seating chart, searching for my name among the elegant calligraphy. Table 12. There it was, near the back of the room, far from the head table where Marcus would sit with his new bride. But it was there, and that's what mattered. I wasn't being shut out completely. I found my assigned seat and froze. The nameplate read, "Charity Case." Not Linda Thompson, not mother of the groom, not even a simple guest. Charity Case. The words hit me like a physical blow. Around me, the reception continued in blissful ignorance, guests finding their seats, servers preparing to pour champagne, the string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon. But I stood there, staring at those two words that reduced everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd endured, to a cruel joke. I looked around the table at the other nameplates. +1, family friend, colleague. All the people Marcus and Isabella deemed unworthy of the inner circle, relegated to the back like an afterthought. But none of them had been labeled with such deliberate cruelty. My hands trembled as I picked up the nameplate. The cardstock was the same expensive quality as the invitations, the calligraphy identical. This wasn't some mix-up or last-minute addition. Someone had carefully ordered this, planned this humiliation. "Mom?" I turned to see Marcus approaching, resplendent in his black tuxedo. At 28, he looked nothing like the scared little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced and hollow. "You look..." He paused, his eyes taking in my outfit. "Nice." The lie sat between us like a chasm. "Thank you," I managed, holding up the nameplate. "I think there's been some mistake." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "This," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "My nameplate." He took it from my hands, and for a moment I saw a flash of something. Guilt? Shame? But it was quickly replaced by cool indifference. "Isabella handles all the seating, arrangements," he said, handing it back. "I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it." "Didn't mean anything?" The words came out louder than I intended, drawing glances from nearby tables. "Marcus, this says charity case." "Mom, please, don't make a scene." His voice was low, urgent. "This is my wedding day." I stared at my son, the boy I'd raised alone, working 3 jobs to put food on the table and clothes on his back. The child I'd sat with through homework sessions and fever-broken nights. The teenager I'd driven to every soccer practice and debate tournament, often straight from my shift at the diner, still smelling of grease and exhaustion. "Don't make a scene," I repeated. "Marcus, I worked 16-hour days to pay for your college applications. I sold my engagement ring to buy you a suit for your high school graduation. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so you could have decent lunches at school." "That was your choice," he said, his voice flat. "I never asked you to sacrifice everything." The words cut deeper than the nameplate ever could. Behind Marcus, I caught sight of Isabella approaching. She was stunning in her designer wedding dress, every inch the society princess. Her blonde hair was arranged in an elaborate updo, and diamonds sparkled at her throat. Probably worth more than I'd made in the past 5 years. "Is everything all right?" Isabella asked, her voice honey-sweet but her blue eyes cold as winter. "Just a small misunderstanding," Marcus said quickly. Isabella's gaze fell on the nameplate in my hands, and I saw the satisfaction flash across her face before she arranged her features into a mask of innocent concern. "Oh my," she said, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "How did that happen?" She was lying. We all knew she was lying. "I think I should go," I said quietly. "Mom, don't—" Marcus started, but Isabella placed a hand on his arm. "Perhaps that's for the best," she said gently. "We wouldn't want any unpleasantness on our special day." I looked at my son one more time, searching his face for some trace of the boy who used to tell me I was his hero. But that boy was gone, replaced by this stranger who stood by while his new wife humiliated the woman who'd raised him. "You're right," I said, my voice steady now. "This is your special day. And you deserve exactly the kind of day you've created." I turned and walked away, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Behind me, I heard the murmur of conversations resuming, the clink of glasses, the cheerful notes of the string quartet. The wedding continued without me, as if I'd never been there at all. But as I reached the lobby, something inside me shifted. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, but it was joined by something else. Anger. Cold, calculating anger. I'd spent 30 years being the victim. 30 years letting people walk over me, dismiss me, treat me like I was less than nothing. First Marcus's father, who'd left me to struggle alone. Then my employers, who'd paid me minimum wage while I broke my back to support my child. And now my own son and his new wife, who thought they could humiliate me and send me slinking home in shame. No more. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found what I was looking for. Janet Morrison, my old friend from high school who now worked as a reporter for the city's largest newspaper. We'd reconnected on social media a few years ago, and I knew she specialized in investigative pieces about corporate corruption and social inequality. "Janet? It's Linda Thompson. Yes, it has been too long. Listen, I have a story you might be interested in, about the Sterling family and their construction company." 3 hours later, I was sitting in Janet's cluttered office downtown, sharing everything I knew about the Sterling construction empire. As it turned out, raising a son who'd once dreamed of being an architect had taught me a lot about the construction industry. And Marcus, in the years before he'd grown ashamed of me, had shared plenty of details about the Sterling family business during his college internships there. "This is fascinating," Janet said, scribbling notes as I spoke. "The Sterling family has always presented themselves as pillars of the community, but if what you're telling me is true—" "It's true," I said. Marcus used to come home shocked by what he saw. Workers being paid under the table to avoid taxes and insurance. Substandard materials being used on low-income housing projects. Safety violations covered up with bribes to inspectors. "And you said Isabella's father, Richard Sterling, is running for city council?" "On a platform of affordable housing and workers' rights," I confirmed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Janet leaned back in her chair, her eyes bright with the thrill of a potential exposé. "Linda, if I can verify even half of this, it could be huge. But I have to ask, why are you coming forward now? Why not years ago when Marcus first told you these things?" I thought about the nameplate, about the look in Isabella's eyes, about my son's casual dismissal of everything I'd sacrificed for him. Because I finally realized that staying quiet to protect people who don't respect me isn't noble, I said. It's just another form of being a victim. The investigation took 3 weeks. Janet was thorough, following paper trails and interviewing former employees who were willing to speak on the record. She uncovered financial records showing systematic tax evasion, safety reports that had been falsified, and testimony from workers who'd been injured on Sterling construction sites and then pressured to accept inadequate settlements. The story ran on a Sunday, spread across the front page with a headline that made my heart race: Sterling Construction, a house built on lies. But that was just the beginning. The article sparked a federal investigation into Sterling Construction's business practices. Richard. Sterling's city council campaign imploded overnight. Multiple lawsuits were filed by former employees and residents of Sterling-built housing developments. And 3 days after the article ran, Marcus called me for the first time since the wedding. "How could you do this?" His voice was raw with anger and disbelief. "How could you destroy our family?" "Your family?" I repeated, the old pain flaring. "Marcus, I haven't been part of your family since you decided I was an embarrassment." "That's not... We never said..." "You didn't have to say it. The nameplate said it for you." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Isabella's father might go to prison," he said finally. Then he should have thought of that before he built his empire on exploiting workers and cutting corners that put people's lives at risk. "You've destroyed everything. Isabella won't even speak to me. She blames me for bringing you into their lives." I felt a flicker of sympathy for my son, but it was quickly overwhelmed by the memory of standing alone in that ballroom, holding a nameplate that reduced me to nothing more than an object of pity. "You made your choice, Marcus," I said. "At your wedding, when you stood by and watched your wife humiliate me, when you told me not to make a scene instead of defending me, when you said my sacrifices were just choices you never asked for. I was trying to keep the peace. You were protecting the wrong person." The conversation ended there. Marcus didn't call again, but others did. The newspaper story had included a sidebar about my own journey as a single mother, working multiple jobs to support my son through college. Apparently, it resonated with people. I started receiving calls from local news stations wanting to interview me about the challenges of single parenthood and economic inequality. A community organization reached out, asking if I'd be interested in speaking at their events about resilience and self-advocacy. A local college invited me to share my story with their social work students. For the first time in my life, people were listening to me not out of pity, but out of respect. The federal investigation concluded 6 months later with multiple indictments, including charges against Richard Sterling for tax evasion, fraud, and conspiracy. Sterling Construction was forced to pay millions in fines and restitution to affected workers and residents. Richard Sterling received a 2-year prison sentence. I learned about the verdict from the evening news, watching from my small apartment where I now lived alone. The reporter mentioned that the investigation had been sparked by a whistleblower story in the local newspaper, but they didn't mention my name. That was fine with me. I wasn't doing this for recognition. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a wedding photo. Marcus and Isabella cutting their cake, both smiling radiantly. At the bottom, someone had written in careful script: "Thank you for showing us who they really are." A former Sterling employee. I studied the photo for a long time, looking at my son's face. He looked happy in the image, genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. I wondered if he'd ever be able to forgive me for shattering the illusion of his perfect new life. But I also wondered if I'd done him a favor. Better to learn the truth about the family he'd married into now than to discover it years later, when the foundations of lies finally crumbled on their own. A year and a half after the wedding, I was shopping at the local grocery store when I turned down the cereal aisle and came face to face with Marcus. He looked older, tired. His clothes were ordinary, jeans and a polo shirt instead of the designer outfits I'd grown accustomed to seeing in the society pages. We stared at each other for a moment. Two strangers connected by blood and history, and a chasm of hurt that neither of us knew how to bridge. "Hi, Mom," he said finally. "Marcus." I nodded, my hand tightening on my shopping cart handle. "I heard you've been speaking at colleges," he said, "about single parenting and workers' rights." "I have." He nodded, looking down at his hands. That's good. You always were braver than you gave yourself credit for." I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I blinked them away. "How are you doing?" "Divorced," he said simply. "Isabella couldn't handle the scandal. She moved back to California to be with family." "I'm sorry." He looked up at me then, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the little boy he used to be. "Are you?" he asked. I considered the question honestly. Was I sorry that my actions had cost him his marriage? Was I sorry that the Sterling family's empire had crumbled? "I'm sorry that you were hurt," I said finally. "But I'm not sorry for telling the truth." Marcus nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said. About the choices I made at the wedding. About who I protected and who I let down." He paused, studying my face. "I let down the most important person in my life," he said. "The woman who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities I took for granted. The woman who taught me right from wrong, even when I forgot those lessons." My throat felt tight. "Marcus, I know I can't undo what happened," he said. "But I want you to know that I remember now. I remember who you are, and who I'm supposed to be." We stood there in the cereal aisle, surrounded by the mundane reality of grocery shopping, and I felt something shift between us. Not forgiveness. That would take time, if it came at all. But recognition, acknowledgement, a beginning. "Would you like to have coffee sometime?" Marcus asked hesitantly. "I mean, if you're willing to try." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the man who'd stood by while I was humiliated, but the child I'd raised to be better than that. The child who'd lost his way but might, with time and effort, find his way back. "I'd like that," I said. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the nameplate that had started it all. Charity case. 2 words meant to diminish and humiliate me. But they'd had the opposite effect. They'd awakened something in me I'd forgotten I possessed. My own worth, my own voice, my own power to change the narrative of my life. I was nobody's charity case. I was Linda Thompson, a woman who'd survived abandonment and poverty, who'd raised a son alone, who'd found the courage to speak truth to power when it mattered most. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The revenge I'd thought I wanted, seeing the Sterling family destroyed, watching their privileged world crumble, had been satisfying. But the real victory was quieter, more personal. I'd found myself again. And maybe, just maybe, I'd helped my son find his way back to the person I'd raised him to be. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations and explosive revelations. This one ended with a conversation in a grocery store and the possibility of coffee and second chances. Sometimes, that's the best kind of ending there is.